And what I'm going to do today is just talk a bit about connected marketing, and we'll start by talking a bit about the consumer, and then just focus on some what we believe are the imperatives that you should focus on, opportunities that are being missed right now. And marketing, I guess, has changed a lot in the last 10 years. I don't think there's any denying that, and it's going to change a lot in the next 10 years. And really, what's been driving this is obviously the changing consumer, the way that consumers behave, the technology they use, the media they consume. And this is what's creating the opportunities for us as marketers to engage better with consumers. And in many ways, the promise is this. So those of you who remember this movie, Minority Report, the idea that you walk into a store, it knows who you are, it can sense, it knows your history, and it will target the right offer to you at the right time to encourage you to buy. This is the promise of what connected marketing gives us. But the reality is actually something a bit more like this, and hopefully...
On the phone, you said that you contact her all day?
I don't contact her all day. You know, maybe just a couple of times in the morning, and then when she's at lunch, and then sometimes when she's shopping and sleeping. I just really want to be close to her all the time.
When you say all the time?
Like nothing too serious. You know, like a casual tweet, a bit of PPC action, retargeting, that sort of thing. About 6 or 8 times a day, maybe 10. Let's say 10 to 20 times a day.
How do you think that makes her feel? I mean, has she ever said she likes it?
Well, not exactly, but I just think she's playing hard to get. You know, she just hasn't quite followed through lately, if you know what I mean.
Followed through?
Paid for me, ordered me, booked me, put me in a basket. She actually unfollowed me on Facebook the other day, which was harsh. It's all part of the game though, right?
Come on.
And maybe it's a little bit harsh, but I think it makes the point that actually no one's really got digital right yet. No one's really got worked out how to connect properly with consumers, and the consumer not being a concern. I kind of agree in some ways, but I also think it is critically important we focus on the consumer. The consumer is going at a faster pace in many ways than marketers. Certainly in terms of research, we're constantly trying to keep up with where consumers are behaving. And so we want to start by just talking about some of the key global trends around consumers. And what I think is important with trends is to make sure you are focused on genuine trends and not fads. I think, as I talked about earlier, the whole idea of an app, I always envisage these CEO barbecues where about 5 years ago, everyone would go along to barbecue and their fellow CEO or their peer would have an app and be showing it off, and so they went back to the office on a Monday morning and said, we need an app too, and didn't really know why they needed an app. And those sort of things have happened for many years in digital. Same with things like Facebook pages, setting them up without really knowing why you have them. So what I'm going to do today is focus on trends that we believe are kind of genuine ones that are happening that you need to really be focusing on. The first of these, and before we do that, the one sales plug I have is that a lot of the results we use are from a study we do called Connected Life. It's been going for a few years now, and it's just wrapped up in the last few weeks. So if you want to know more about the data, please talk to us afterwards. But let's start by talking about these consumer trends. So the first of which is what we call constantly connected. Now, if you actually look at the global reach of different devices versus traditional media now, globally, amongst people who are online, which is about 3.2 billion people, now devices, so mobiles, tablets, PCs, now get a bigger reach throughout the entire day than traditional media like radio, TV, and so on. The one exception is dinner time. People don't like to eat and tweet at the same time, but otherwise that's the only time that people are kind of switching back to in terms of maximising reach to traditional media. Now it's often hard to compare. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Traditional media is still measured in minutes. A lot of digital is very, very short amount of time, but can be just as engaging, or if not more engaging. So it's hard to compare. But in terms of actual reach now, digital media is the highest. And what we also find is that this constant connectivity is driven by mobile. There's no real secret there, and But it is a really fundamental shift in terms of how we can market to people, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. But I'll use the US as an example. We run a behavioral panel in the US, which is recording what people do on their devices. And we record 83 kind of sessions a day on average. With younger people, it's about 120. But even with the kind of over 55s, it's still something like 50, 60 sessions a day. Each session's about 1:44 on average. So very, very short chunks of time. But this is really changing the way we can think about, connecting with people in terms of marketing, and it does create, new opportunities. And it's created this kind of constantly connected generation, which we'll talk about a bit later on. Now, the second kind of key trend is around social fragmentation. And I think some of you, well, hopefully have seen this, and that's that basically in one day, just a couple of months ago, Facebook reached 1 billion people via their Facebook platform. This is without things like WhatsApp and Instagram, of which they obviously own as well. They reached 1 billion people in one day. So if you think about it, it's kind of like the first truly global advertising platform. Facebook's, we talk about it in social, but in many ways it's an ad platform. The incremental reach of posts is so small now. It's really about advertising. So it does give us the opportunity to advertise. If you're a major brand like someone like Coca-Cola, you could reach 1 billion people via an advertising campaign in a single day, which is pretty amazing, via the one channel. But the kind of key trend around social is the fragmentation. And this is in Australia now. People use on average about 5.7 kind of what we call social networks, but also instant messenger platforms, things like WhatsApp and so on. And it's a pretty amazing number. Globally, it's about 4.8, so it's a little bit lower. So Australians do love kind of social and IM more than others. And it doesn't mean that people are leaving Facebook. They're not. They're still using Facebook a lot, but they are adopting other platforms. And this can be illustrated just by this. So if you look at the actual number of platforms used by different types of users. So if you think about Snapchat as being kind of one of the newer platforms, it's been around for a few years, but it's kind of one of the buzz platforms right now. If you're using Snapchat, you're using on average 9.6 social platforms a week. It's an incredible number. But what we also find is on some of these newer platforms, the engagement is really strong. So with Facebook, you can get the reach, but really some of these newer platforms are delivering the engagement that you're looking for. So when you're thinking about social, it really means that you need to think much more beyond Facebook if you're not already, because some of the other platforms are really starting to drive traction. Now, the third kind of key point to make is around device usage. And I think for a long time, we've seen this kind of constant year-on-year growth of the number of devices that people have. But we're actually seeing that plateau in the last couple of years. Now, the magic number in the developed world is 3. And that's the kind of the number of devices people are using on a regular basis. And actually in some parts of particularly developed Asia, they're starting to decline. It's going down to kind of 2.8. So it's actually starting to decline. But essentially, these people are juggling these 3 different devices. They're using them for different functions, and the way in which they're using has changed over the last few years. And in particular, the kind of change has been around mobile. In the past, mobile had a very kind of certain set of things that it was used for, but it wasn't used for things like productivity or for shopping, for example. But now we're seeing this big shift in terms of mobile with shopping as well. And this is just a simple illustration of how people in Australia are researching and shopping for products. And about 57% is still on the laptop, PC, and so on. But over 40% now is on tablets and on the phone. And that's just constantly growing. And the key point is that the migration between the devices. If you own all 3, you're kind of searching for something on a mobile and going to a tablet and going to your PC and so on. And Sahil mentioned it earlier. It seems like a no-brainer that to have a mobile site, a mobile app, whatever it might be, or to make sure you can sell via mobile. But it's still not being done enough by enough people. And it's about this seamless experience across the different devices. The other kind of key trend within this is the kind of large screen phones, which are growing. I'm sure most people in this room have now got a larger screen phone. People call them phablets, but I think it's just a big phone, basically. And the market share is growing around the world. And in Australia, it's a relatively small amount. I think actually New Zealand's about to overtake Australia. So they're very pleased about that when I was there last week. But it's about a quarter of people have these large screen phones, and this will go up in the next couple of years. It'll be 60, 80% of people have large screen phones, and the kind of key thing is that when they get large screen phones, the usage becomes even more pronounced. So whether it be online video, e-commerce, whatever it might be, just grows more and more. And so you're going to start to see this the mobile become increasingly important. It's not, this is not anything new really, but we're just showing the kind of evidence to show you that if you haven't started to kind of really work hard on mobile, it's kind of time to do that. Actually, Helen who's, I think has left now, unfortunately. She was here talking about the shifting in content. And the way that we look at it is from the movement from TV to content. And you can read, if you read, particularly on any stats around the US right now, TV is, in theory, in dire straits. Last year, traditional TV viewing declined by 12%, which, if you think about it, is an incredible number across kind of 330 million people. But the reality is that TV is actually booming. It's just that the way that people are kind of watching TV is changing dramatically. And this is data from Australia in terms of daily reach, and that people are claiming that they're watching across different channels. The reality is that a lot of the kind of newer channels, or the newer kind of ways of accessing, are much shorter, as we talked about. On demand is generally much shorter periods of time. You don't sit down and watch kind of like a 2-hour movie that often via a mobile device. But so TV still gets the majority of minutes. But in terms of actually the engagement, then the newer platforms are gaining speed. And really, the key trend that was mentioned by Helen is the kind of movement from broadcast to on-demand. But the second one is around how do you target. So when I used to live in Australia, I worked with clients who are still kind of thinking about how do I target prime time? How do I make sure the TV shows I'm advertising against are in prime time? And not necessarily caring as much about the TV shows as probably they should do. Whereas now the context of what you're advertising within is critically important, because who knows what people are watching in prime time? It could be anything. So attaching your content to the right show or the right context is becoming critically important. Now the kind of fifth trend we're going to talk about is app consolidation. So there's now 2.6 million apps across the two different main stores. 80% of time that people spend on their phone is with apps. So the apps are critically important. When people install an app on their phone, within about 25% of them are deleted within 10 minutes. So it's pretty hard to stay on there. It's about 38% within a day. So in other words, you can get someone to install your app, but it doesn't mean it's going to stay there. It can often get dropped. And on average, people have 64 apps on their phone at any one time. Again, this is kind of US data, but it's a very similar market in terms of mobile usage to Australia. But only 12 are used a day. And of that 12, kind of 3 or 4 are kind of native apps, so things like the alarm clock, that type of thing. So actually, when you look at it, it's really about 8 apps a day that people will use. And it's dominated by, unsurprisingly, a couple of organizations. So if you look at the top 10 apps this is on Android, it's exactly the same situation in terms of iOS as well. You have Facebook and you have Google basically controlling an awful lot of the traffic in terms of mobile. And really the implication here is that this consolidation, and this consolidation's happened before. With websites, a similar thing happened from like 2000, 2010. It went from having like a very long tail to actually a few kind of key sites driving a lot of the traffic. And this consolidation is happening in apps as it happened in websites at that time. Yeah, this is all yes, yeah. And so it's a very similar situation in Australia. We just don't have the same behavioural panel here that we have in the US. But it gives you the same story. So actually reaching people via mobile is really quite easy. You can predict what they're going to be doing on their phone. The challenge is it's probably not your app that they're going to be using. And it really emphasises the importance of partnerships with these kind of key parties. Now, the kind of last trend I'm going to talk about before we move on to some of the implications is e-commerce. And we touched on this, Sahil touched on this very, very early on today about e-commerce, and it's growing. Globally, we saw about 4% kind of increase in penetration of e-commerce in the last year. And what we do is we tier markets by sophistication in terms of penetration, but also some of the barriers that we see stopping people from buying. Australia is in the kind of top tier, and what we're seeing every year is just the number of markets kind of moving up and up and up is just getting more and more So it's becoming, it's becoming much more common that people are buying online, obviously, and there's nothing really new in that. I think what we see a lot of, though, is the real trend towards kind of how you think about e-commerce and the way you think about it. And it was mentioned earlier in terms of omni-channel is kind of one way of referring to it. But really what it's about is understanding the impact of the online component of your ecosystem and how that's driving kind of in-store traffic. And this is becoming, again, the really important thing to understand. How do you understand what you're doing online and how that's impacting your overall sales, not just your online sales? So a lot of people have tried e-commerce and have felt it's been potentially a failure because the penetration isn't there or the revenue isn't there. But actually the way it's impacting on in-store traffic and in-store sales is really important. In the US last year, footfall into retail environments declined 7%. Which is, again, a really big number, but the average value increased. And that's all driven by online systems, online sites, online apps, and so on. Equally, I think it's Deloitte attributed $1 trillion worth of retail had been influenced by mobile. And it might be something as simple as, where's the store that I can find this product that I'm looking for to help people to do that. So, a lot of online infrastructure, online information is driving the in-store sale. And this is an example from Macy's, which again is another kind of example, a bit like the John Lewis one, which is used. And what they've worked out is that if you can start to understand the online components in terms of people using their site, using their app, knowing that their product is available, that type of thing, and then driving people in store, the actual value of those people is really high. And if you think about it, it's quite obvious because instead of having to go and search on Amazon or a competitive site, they're keeping within the ecosystem and they're keeping their loyalty there. So again, it's really about making sure e-commerce is looked at just much more beyond the penetration rate and much more about the role that online is playing in the in-store environment as well. Now, what we're going to do now is just talk about three imperatives, and Chris mentioned some of these earlier, and I'll just touch on each of these three very briefly. And the way that we see these is there's lots of opportunities around the connected consumer and what you can do from a marketing perspective. And there's some things that we see people are doing or not doing that can make a difference. So what we want to do today is just focus on three things that we think you should be doing that we don't necessarily see people doing right now. And the first of these is the one we call marrying data with strategy. And ironically, this is kind of maybe a bit of a controversial point, but we're in an era where we have data-driven advertising. We have DMPs that help us to do kind of behavioral targeting of advertising, and everyone seems to be obsessed with kind of ad targeting and retargeting. But the question is it really more effective or not? And ironically, I think it's not right now, and I'll explain why in the next few minutes. Now, when you think about behavioral targeting in particular, you go to a website and you're searching for something. It might be on Google, it might be on wherever. And then the next time you go onto maybe Facebook, it might be just Sydney Morning Herald, whatever it might be. You're constantly seeing the same advertising over and over and over again. And this comment is, it's not necessarily unique to Facebook. It's happening in all sorts of environments. And it's becoming a real point of annoyance for a lot of consumers. And actually, Australia is one of the markets where people show the greatest concern, not quite as high as, say, Germany or even New Zealand in terms of concern with being tracked online, but it is a market where there are concerns about privacy. And ultimately, what's going on here is that this is people's behaviour is being captured, and then the targeting is happening, and and everyone's buying essentially the same kind of data to target against. And if you take a step back and think about how do people make decisions about brands, the perceptions of a brand is made up. It's not just based on I suddenly see an online banner ad and that's going to make me go and buy something. But people's opinions on brands have formed over many, many years. Often it's about TVCs, big expensive TVCs, or brand campaigns that have been going that have helped people form an opinion about the brand. And when they get into the market, then there's contextual things like price or availability, those sort of things that help them make a decision that might mean that they either choose that product that they had in mind or to move away from the product that they were thinking about getting. But the reality is that in most situations, and this is an average across a whole range of categories, about half of people have made their mind up on what brand they're going to buy before they even start the purchase process. Now, it does vary by shopper mission. So sometimes, if you're looking for, a new product, a category you're not really familiar with, maybe you have a more open mind towards brand. But if you're in a pressured situation, you're often very, very quick to make a decision about what brand you have. So in this instance, how is this whole behavioural targeting working? Because if people have already made their mind up, what's going on? And a good example would be something like automotive. So you often see, if you go and browse on, say, Auto Trader from the UK, you might browse for a car, and then again, you suddenly get this advertising targeting everywhere you go. You'll be targeted with a car. But the reality is the car purchase starts months and months and months in advance, and maybe there's not even a signal that you can see around, that people are in the market for a new car. So by the time they start purchasing, generally they've already made their mind up. So the kind of key point here is that you're too late. And the second thing is that often people are buying the same data. Again, we see it in a lot of markets where the data point around new car buyers is being used and bought over and over again. And so we kind of challenge this, and we've been working with a number of different agencies around how do you kind of change the paradigm here and start to target higher up the funnel. So instead of targeting people who are in the path to purchase, actually target people who are in the mindset for a particular brand. So targeting the brand rather than actually the category in that way. Really, what we're saying is just because when someone's in the path to purchase doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right place to be targeting. And you need to make sure you're balancing the kind of strategic target and making sure you're targeting that in amongst the kind of behavioural and programmatic targeting. The second one I just wanted to talk on is about personalisation. I'm not going to go into great detail because Anne's going to talk a bit more about this in a second. But one of the kind of opportunities we see is much more around, that's not been exploited yet, is about personalisation of advertising and content. And the line between content and advertising is becoming more and more blurred. I think that's a lot of consumers can't tell the difference between what's an ad and what's content sometimes, and rightly so. It is kind of shifting the industry, but in many ways it is easier than ever to get across your message. There's more formats, there's more styles you can adopt to really get your messaging across to consumers in a way that's suitable for your brand. And depending on what category you're in, you might choose to do a different route. So this looks at the way in which people engage with categories. There are some categories that are easier to engage with as a consumer, or more willing to engage as a consumer than others. So if you're a travel company, someone like Tourism Australia, it's relatively easy for them to drive engagement. Whereas if you're household care, it's pretty hard to get people to engage with your category. So your decision around content versus advertising and how you kind of straddle that should be driven by that. But there's beyond that, there's still this whole concept of personalisation. And many of you will know the kind of this framework that we use called Need Scope, which has proven over many, many years that you need to tailor your communications, your advertising to different people. Depending on what someone's needs are, they're going to respond to different messaging. And this example is from Coke, where from a portfolio perspective, different people have different needs from a soft drink, and hence you need to tailor your communications accordingly. Now, in a programmatic world, in a data-driven world, we have the ability to target each individual with a unique piece of communications. And yet globally, the number of organisations, or the number of campaigns, that are actually doing this is far less than 10%. I mean, that 10% is the highest we've kind of seen. So in other words, there might be a campaign that's running for a particular brand. They have the ability to target different people within that campaign differently, but only 10% of campaigns are actually doing that, or less. So there's a big opportunity to kind of make sure you're tailoring the messaging to the individual. And it's the same when you look at social. So this is looking at the people who follow Pepsi globally on Twitter. And so what we see is that over the course of the last few years, they've acquired different people depending on what they've been doing. So sometimes they're doing something around soccer, so they hence acquire a soccer audience. Other times they're doing something around Justin Bieber. And they're acquiring this kind of audience of people. And then what they're doing is they're still pushing out content to the masses. So if you develop content that's appealing to Justin Bieber fans, the chances of it being appealing to a football fan is probably quite low. So again, there's this kind of lack of personalisation that's happening. And we believe this is a kind of really, really key opportunity to kind of tailor, both in terms of advertising and also social content to the right audience. Now, what are they looking for? What are people looking for in terms of content? Well, there's a number of different things that we see that are kind of critical that people want to get. And it's really these three buckets. It's about information. It's about informing people. It's about utility. So there's something that's going to help them, and it's about entertainment. And these three things are what's driving kind of engagement in content. It does depend on category. Some categories are more suited to entertainment than others, and utility and so on. But ultimately, this is the content that people are looking for. And to a large extent, people have been focused on things like how many likes I get, how many things like that do people give me, shares, and so on. We kind of refer to that very much as kind of vanity metrics. It's not really telling you anything. And really, what you need to focus on is what impact is it having on your brand metrics. And there are obviously measurement ways in which you can do that now. Now, the last point around sharing, around content and personalization of content, is then around sharing and what makes people share, because that has been the kind of key thing that people want to do, want to get content amplified. And the way that we talk about this is very much around the individual. So if you think about yourself, why do you share content with people on Facebook or on Twitter? It's all about reflecting your own personal brand. So I would share something on Facebook that I think my Facebook friends, my friends and family would like. Likewise on Twitter, I would share something, but that's a more professional kind of channel. So it's all about sharing. So really, it's about making sure you're pushing content that really drives the individual's brand. So the way we're talking about this now is if you have 2.7 billion social users worldwide, and they're using an average of 2.5 networks a week, you have an opportunity to brand, or to 7 billion brands is the number of kind of people you can influence and change. The last trend I'm going to focus on, or last imperative I'm going to focus on very quickly, is around moments that matter. And really, again, the kind of one of the key things people are focused on around the world is moments. You look at what Apple are doing, you look at what Google are doing, Twitter, Facebook. Everyone's focused on moment marketing. It's kind of the kind of key trend. And if you think about it, in many ways, it's quite easy to predict now what people are doing. For example, as I mentioned earlier, there's 83 moments a day, and you've got a very small number of apps that people are using on a mobile device. So if you wanted to think about, when are people eating their sandwich and what are they doing, it's quite easy to do. It's quite easy to think about. It's easy to work out, are they on Facebook, are they on Instagram, whatever they might be doing. So people are quite predictable, and where you can find people is quite predictable. And depending on what the activities are, some moments are more predictable than others. So in other words, things like social gaming are kind of everyday routines, every check kind of routines that people do. Whereas the other end of the spectrum is things like searching and buying. They're less predictable, but even still, people are still quite predictable in things like grocery shopping and when they're doing their grocery shopping on phones and so on. So it does create new marketing opportunities. And what we see is there's kind of three key questions you need to understand the answers to know what moments matter to your brand. So let's say the first one is every brand has a different kind of moment. Sometimes it's around breakfast maybe, sometimes it's about a certain activity. There's also, you need to understand where you can find a target at those key moments. And the final point is, when are they most receptive? So what is it that's going to drive them to engage at that different moment in time? So the first kind of point here is moments that matter to your brand. Now, if you're a CPG brand, it's much easier to think about, much easier to execute against. And this is an example where we show the difference between market share throughout the day and what we call situational equity, which is potential market share for a brand like Starbucks. So you can see at certain points in the day, they have an opportunity where their potential market share, people's desire to have a coffee, a Starbucks coffee, is higher than their actual market share. So it's quite easy for them to spot that opportunity. But even in other categories, like non-CPG categories, like automotive, you can still have certain key periods during the week that are more important to an automotive brand than other periods during the week. So it's about understanding what moment is most important to your brand. The second thing is then looking at the activities that people are doing, like where are you going to find someone? So if you're Starbucks and you decide lunchtime is what you need to target, then what activities are people doing? And now with data, it's very, very easy to work out what someone's doing at lunchtime and how to reach them. So in this example, this is again from Australia, very simple example. Social's done pretty much throughout the day. There's key spikes for around shopping in the morning. This video gets bigger in the evening. But this is just an illustration. You can go much more detailed on this. And the final question then is really about when are people most receptive? Because you might decide that, okay, I need to target someone at lunchtime. This is the channel I need. But is that when consumers are really going to be most receptive to your messaging? Is that the time that people are going to respond or engage? And this is probably the most subjective question, because depending on what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to inform people or get information, or entertain people, they're looking for different things. And what we thought was a really interesting study from Spain was where a university had worked out how to, this is Telefonica, the Spanish telco, and a university had worked out that they could predict when people are bored. And when people are bored, they're 2 or 3 times more likely to engage with content and to engage with posts. And so they've actually written an algorithm now to predict when people are bored, and then to make sure that their messaging is being sold against that. So again, it is a harder question to answer, when are they most receptive, but I think it is a really important thing to think about. So if you can answer those 3 questions, I think you can start to get towards where you need to be in terms of moment marketing. As I say, I'm just going to finish here and just say, my final point is, if you can find and own the moments that are relevant to your brand, I think you'll be going in the right direction. So thank you.